Welcome to our first full day here of our conference. It's my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the Business School here, Bob Bruner. One of the things we talk about here at Darden is our ideal professor is what we could call a triathlete, a world-class researcher, an amazing teacher in the classroom, and a wonderful citizen who provides service to the school, to the university, and to the profession. When I look at our Darden faculty, we have lots of wonderful triathletes, but I think the all-time winner of multiple Ironman triathlons has to be our Dean, Bob Bruner. Bob is an accomplished researcher. Most recently, he had a book talking about the Panic of 1907. Very timely because there's a nice parallels between 1907 and 2008. Bob assures us that his book did not cause the panic of 2008, though it did come out right at that time. Bob is an amazing teacher, has won numerous teaching awards, is really just a legend around Darden in terms of his teaching. And then in terms of his service, he has provided service in any number of ways, but as Dean, he just recently received the first Poets and Quants Dean of the Year award. So he is well recognized in all of those aspects. And just one final note, Bob was actually the first director of the Batten Institute back in 2000-2001. So please join me in welcoming Bob Bruner.
Well, greetings on behalf of the faculty and staff and community here at the Darden School and the University of Virginia. Greetings and welcome to all of you, both all of you here in the room as well as distributed digitally wherever you may be in the world. This is an exciting event, and I'd like to open with my commendation to the Academy of Management for its leadership and foresight in organizing an event such as this and other events that bring together specialists in the field of entrepreneurship and in related fields. These are, I think these broaden the mission and impact of professional societies, and I'm delighted that the Darden School can collaborate with the Academy of Management in this gathering. Plainly, as you read the daily news, you see affirmation of the importance of the subject of this conference. For indeed, everyone in the developed economies as well as in the emerging economies realizes that economic growth is and must be the engine for social advancement worldwide, and entrepreneurship and innovation are the engines of economic growth. And so it's appropriate. It's in fact vitally important for business schools, universities, departments of many different disciplines to come together around this important topic. What can a university do would be the leading question, and the answer will be different for every school and university because schools' circumstances differ, but I can just outline for you briefly what the University of Virginia and the Darden School have done. It begins with the establishment of our Batten Institute in 2001, thanks to a very large gift from a donor in the Commonwealth of Virginia who had the foresight to endow our school with this wonderful center. It was one of the largest gifts to any business school at the time, and therefore risky, perhaps, in the eyes of some. You know, what is this field of entrepreneurship? Is it a well-established discipline? What are the norms, the journals, the codes, etc.? Well, because of Frank Batten's leadership gift in 2001, I think our school has helped all of us, all of you, advance the game in scholarship as well as outreach to the world of business in this vitally important area. We were ranked recently by Entrepreneur Magazine and Princeton Review number 3. These rankings are never as rigorous as one would like them to be, but the fact that leading publications are now paying attention to the heft, the commitment that universities and business schools are bringing to the field is another bellwether of the emerging importance of this field. Darden's always had a dual mission of both serving students as being an educator in the field, as well as serving researchers. So Darden strives to be a thought leader in entrepreneurship and innovation. On the education front, we offer a rich set of opportunities. We offer some 20 full-paid scholarships to students who are interested in entrepreneurship. We know that entrepreneurs experience a struggle in the years immediately following business school, typically to establish their businesses. And without these scholarships, without this financial aid, we would drive many of the most promising business developers into large corporate life or other fields where their aspirations and talents may be less well harnessed. I think that the role of financial aid is proving to be increasingly important as all of us seek to energize and stimulate the founding of new businesses. We also offer 40 venture internships per year. We operate an incubator, which we are about to expand quite dramatically. And we have we sponsor university-wide business concept and business plan competitions. So it turns out that a business school can do a lot. Whether or not the school has the financial resources, in fact, I submit that a business school can do a lot to stimulate entrepreneurship and innovation in the school and in the region around the school. On the research front, we provide nearly $500,000 in faculty research grants per year. We run a robust faculty fellows program that seeks to bring visitors to our grounds. And we host a number of impactful events, conferences, workshops, seminars, gatherings such as this. And so this meeting this week is quite consistent with our overarching mission to contribute to the thought leadership in this field. I can tell you that our encouragement, speaking for the faculty and staff and students here at the Darden School, our encouragement is with you. We're delighted to have you in our community. We invite you back as the opportunity may arise. I hope that you find the ideas and the debate and exchange in this program to be stimulating and fruitful as you contemplate carrying forward your own work. And wherever you go, do travel safely and carry our best wishes with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Thank you. So if I can ask our first panelists up here, up front with me. So I am joined here by an august panel of experts in entrepreneurship and innovation. I have immediately to my left Gary Dushnitsky, who is an associate professor at the London Business School in the Strategy and Entrepreneurship Unit. We have Mary Tripsas, who is associate professor at the Harvard Business School in the Entrepreneurial Unit. And we have Rajshree Agarwal, who's a chair professor at the University of Maryland in the Strategy and Entrepreneurship Unit as well. The topic for our first panel here is this question about the confluence of entrepreneurship and innovation research. As Dean Bruner just mentioned, the Batten Institute, we've always had this joint mission of dealing both with entrepreneurship and innovation. And I think, as many of us in this room know, there's been an evolution in these various fields. We have, on the case of entrepreneurship, a growth and a maturation in the last 10, 15 years, where we're now at a point that we see departments of entrepreneurship being formed, entrepreneurship in some schools being a core course included in the curriculum, and numerous scholars now moving in and viewing entrepreneurship as their primary field of study. On the other side, we have this topic of innovation, very broad, crosses many disciplinary bounds, economics, sociology, business disciplines like strategy, finance, marketing, all talking about this concept of innovation. And unfortunately, over the years, in some respects, these areas of study have sometimes operated somewhat independently. And the scholars in these areas have not fully communicated with one another. A quick anecdote, about 10 years ago, back when I was not a professor here, but I was actually a professor at NYU, I had an opportunity to meet another young scholar, Saras Sarasvathy, who's now one of my colleagues here at Darden. I think at the time, Saras was at the University of Maryland. And I made an offhand comment. I come from a tradition of innovation, and in particular technology strategy, corporate innovation and the like. And I made the offhand comment that entrepreneurship at the end of the day, it's just tech strategy reversed on its side here, right? I talk about large established companies fighting off these these new entrants into their field. You talk about entrants trying to get into these established industries where these entrenched incumbents are. So it took about maybe 5 minutes for Saris to basically disabuse me of this very naive notion that I had. And it always stuck with me as a conversation. It's been wonderful to have her here now as a colleague, and we can have these kind of in-depth conversations close by. Clearly, there are interesting distinctions between these areas and also interesting opportunities at the intersection. You see the chart behind me here. This was prepared by Rajshree for our panel discussion. And you get the idea again that there are those topics that are really at the intersection of entrepreneurship and innovation. And there are those topics that still remain, maybe rightfully or wrongfully, within these other domains, either entrepreneurship or innovation independently. So we had a very rich discussion in preparation for this panel. I think we could go on for maybe 3 hours, but we have only an hour here to do that. I have a question I'm going to ask of each of the panelists. They're going to respond, and then we want to open it up to the audience for any questions that you may have. So we decided there's 3 questions we want to ask, and all of them are framed around this question of what is gained or lost by looking at innovation and entrepreneurship as an isolation here. So for example, what is gained or lost by looking at innovation and entrepreneurship as just startups or just established companies? What is gained or lost by looking at innovation and entrepreneurship at only one level of analysis? Industry, firm, individual. And then finally, what is gained and lost by looking at entrepreneurship and innovation through only one lens, say incentives or capabilities or non-pecuniary incentives? So with that, let me turn it over to the panel. Rajshree, why don't you start us off with your thoughts on this?
And so just to fill it up, the 3 perspectives that we were asked. Good morning. So the 3 perspectives that Mike charged us with is that I was to look critically, in some sense, at my own prior work as it relates to these 3 questions. Mary's going to design a research project around this with data that she has on air taxis, and Gary's going to do this examining the duality that you were pointing to, right? Is this really duals of small versus large, and different perspectives and so on, right? So Andrew's going to keep me in time here. So my own perspective, so are we going to go through each 3 questions all together?
Yes, you have 10 minutes.
Right, okay, 10 minutes. But I have control here. Okay, so starting on to that first question, looking at innovation and entrepreneurship as just startups or just established companies. What's gained? Clearly, one of the things you can do if you're looking at it at a unitary perspective is you can really focus and you can do a deep dive into what causes each type of firm to be innovative / entrepreneurial, right? And so you can go into the theoretical implications, practical implications in terms of identification, causal relationships between what you think are the determinants and, of course, performance. So for me, for instance, the focus on startups is where I looked at spin-outs, employee entrepreneurship. And in my 2004 paper, we studied factors that went all the way from causes of the genesis to showing inheritance to then establishing the performance indicator, right? And so the theory and the empirics allowed us to build a very cohesive story that tied all 3 aspects together. Similarly, on the focus on established firms in the review piece as an introduction to our special issue on strategic renewal, Connie and I were able to look at factors that examine both incremental renewal as well as discontinuous transformation of firms. There again, we were able to integrate, particularly because we had this great set of papers that focused on process, on outcome, and of course on the content of what firms were doing, established firms were doing as they were dealing with change. But again, to come back to this entrance or startups and incumbents, our typical characterization of a startup is it's innovative, it's dynamic, it's de novo, flexible, fresh. And on the other hand, when we talk about incumbents, we do give them the fact that they're experienced, that they have these inheritance of routines and so on. But then we also talk about the fact that they could be constrained, there's inertia, and so on. And so in both of these views, I think there is some truth about gains and losses that each of these two different types of firms face. Indeed, going back to Schumpeter, one can talk about this process of creative destruction. And the basic notion is that the incumbent, as soon as the entrant comes in, the entrant gains at the expense of the incumbent. So you have this process of creative destruction where the old is being destroyed by the new. Well, and indeed, in the Agarwal et al., as well as a recent paper with Ben, Martin, and April, we do show that the spin-out's gain is at the parent's expense. However, what's lost in looking at only one side of the perspective is, of course, the fact that these are complementary. Both in terms, there are complementary roles for both startups and established firms, and there is a lot of both cooperative as well as competitive ramifications. So the way I like to think about this is really to embed the fact that knowledge investments are typically made by existing organizations. These could be firms, these could be universities, this could be users, as Mary and Sonali have shown on their user entrepreneurship paper there, right? And so regardless of who's making the knowledge investments, really there is entrepreneurial action that could occur both on the part of the firm that's making these knowledge investments, but more importantly, the individuals that are embedded in that context. So the duality here is that if it's firms that are acting on this knowledge, the interaction of both entrepreneurship and knowledge, if you will result in strategic renewal and hence cause this heterogeneity in capabilities and performance. On the other hand, if it's the individuals that enter into new venture formation, they also contribute to this heterogeneity. Together, this then forms what I would like to call a virtuous cycle that results in growths of industries, regions, and economies. So examining only one piece of the puzzle is leaving aside or not allowing us to look at what the other aspects are. So indeed, what's lost out here is this potential for examining an alternative path. So Gary, you're going to be talking a little bit about your own work, which talks about incumbents and startups and how they both help each other out. And indeed, the creative destruction is the dominant paradigm that we have in our literature. However, we need to start thinking about this creative construction process, the spill-ins, so that the incumbents don't necessarily lose when the entrants come in, but they have a lot to gain because of the knowledge that they learn. Yesterday, Scott was talking about experimentation and learning on the part of entrepreneurial firms. Well, you can vicariously learn because of other people's experience too. And I don't think that we've done enough to take on the complementary aspects or the win-win scenarios as opposed to the win-lose in these two types of firms. Regarding your second question, I'm doing good on time. Okay, good. So it's a single unit of analysis, right? What's gained? Again, focus, that helps. Indeed, same as the above question, it allows you to focus on the phenomena. And most importantly, it allows you to look where the light is, right? The drunk searching for their keys where the light is, right? But in this particular case, there's actually keys to be found below the spotlight as well. And indeed, the data are easier to gather when you're focused on a single unit of analysis. Research design may significantly differ across these units of analysis. So for instance, one of the things I learned from Sonali when she and I were colleagues together is the value of qualitative deep dive into an understanding where, for me, coming from the economics perspective and large-scale data sets, I realized that there was a lot that you could gloss over if you're looking at large-scale data sets as opposed to really qualitative insights. Creation of variables that permit systematic analysis of the theoretical questions being asked, right? So if you're looking at an industry level of analysis, or across industry studies, by definition, you're going to lose some of the granularity that is context specific for each of the within industry contexts. And the analysis and attributions are, of course, much, much messier if you're trying to incorporate multiple levels, right? So it's when, again, putting on my economist hat, I think of this as akin to a partial equilibrium approach, where you're using simplifying assumptions about the state of nature. What's gained? The identification of potential relationships, again, relating to my own work. At the industry level, for instance, my early dissertation work and work with Michael Gort looked at these 33 plus industries, and we were able to really examine what were some inter-industry differences in the diffusion of innovations, in firm takeoff, in sales takeoff, and of course in firm survival. At the firm level, in the piece that I'd already mentioned, the knowledge transfer from parent to spin-out firms and the underexploited knowledge that begets spin-outs. And then at the individual level, what types of employees are more likely to leave and where are they likely to go? So the punchline from this paper is that high earners are less likely to leave, but if they left, they're much more likely to create startups than to join established firms. But again, what's lost is that each of these focusing on a single unit of analysis is missing out on the determinants at the other levels of analysis. So for instance, in the focus at the industry level, when I was doing the piece on in the Journal of Law and Economics on firm takeoff, that was my early clue that indeed the reason why firm takeoff or competitive entry was shrinking across 33 plus industries over chronological time could not necessarily be attributed to capital intensity, to advertising intensity and all of these aspects, but definitely to knowledge diffusion because of people. So I had that early clue that indeed people matter, right, in industries. They're the ones that make decisions. But I really didn't do a systematic study of this, right? I just left this as, oh, that's cool. But then, of course, that got me thinking. And then at the firm level, we examined knowledge transfer from parent to spin-out firms, but lo and behold, people were still missing. This was very much, it's a story about founders, but I wasn't necessarily looking at the founders themselves, right? So at the more micro level, even though we're talking about founders, they were largely absent from this study. And then at the industry level, what's missing out here is how might factors like minimum efficient scale, demand, impact the rates and success of entrepreneurial firms. On the focus on the individual level, again, we can allude to, but we're not testing the pecuniary, non-pecuniary incentives of employees and how might these observed relationships differ across professional services, which is the context that we examine, and high-tech knowledge-intensive industries. So, and very importantly, I think what's lost here, especially because we tend to look within strategy and entrepreneurship at either individuals or firms or industries largely, is we are missing a seat on the policy table. So Peter, you remember when you, Nikolai, Jay, and I wrote this piece in SO, which discusses the fact that underlying heterogeneity is key to any kind of policy issues that we will be looking at. And largely speaking, we from the business school are absent from those policy conversations. And indeed, there are other macroeconomic conditions that one needs to be thinking about. So in the work that I'm doing with Atsushi and with Steve Sonka, we're questioning policies at institutions of higher education, that's us, in terms of what are we doing to prepare our scientists and engineers to really be successful in the industry. We automatically assume that they're going to be following in our footsteps, particularly in the sciences, whereas 76% of these are going to do jobs other than basic academic research. So what do we have to say in terms of research as it relates to that? Effect on immigration policy on scientific labor markets. That's again another hot topic that we strategy and entrepreneurship scholars are largely not discussing much on. So just generally speaking, I think, you know, the innovation and entrepreneurship flows, we need to be thinking about this as micro to macro and feedback loops. And what's gained here is the ability to look at these things together. Last question. What happens if you're looking at just one lens? What's gained, again, it's going to sound like a repetition, is it's allowing you focus. It's difficult enough to master one theoretical domain, right? How many of you are doctoral students here? Right? Several of you out here, right? It's difficult enough to figure out what it is, the lens that you're looking at, and master the literature there. So what are the insights from applying the assumptions that you're making. And indeed, economics may focus on incentives, strategy on capability, psychology on cognition and motivation, sociology on innovations, and each of these are large bodies of work. And more importantly, they make fundamentally different assumptions of human behavior. And sometimes these assumptions are incompatible with each other. So having to, at the same time, deal with multiple lenses at the same, in the same paper might make it very messy. What's last, of course, is this classic story of the blind man and the elephant, right? So one person can say, well, it's a wall, it's a rope, it's a tree, whichever way you look at it. Right? So what's lost is this integrated and overarching framework across disciplines. And there is this opportunity to focus on both similarities and differences. So for instance, in my own work, starting from economics, I took a very, very traditional econ approach on how industries are created and how they diffuse. My first instance at incorporating another lens was when Barry Bass, who's a marketing professor at UNC, said, you know, there's the demand side and there's the supply side. Let's bring it together. Wow, what a concept, even for an economist, right? And then in Agarwal, Sarkar, and Ichambadi, the reviewers really forced us to integrate. You know, so here's this paper that's taking a very economics approach, but there is huge literature streams on technology management and sociology, and you guys aren't doing anything about it, right? But this was really eye-opening as a review process for me in terms of the importance of incorporating multiple disciplinary lenses and the ability to identify the relative explanatory power of the underlying ones. So in another paper, I was able to tease out, for instance, economic explanations from social psychology explanations as it related to strategic lenses. 1 minute? Over time, right? Okay. I have to have a Dilbert cartoon, right? So as it relates to these underlying mechanisms, ability, capabilities, or attitude, right? So here's Catbird. Do you want to lay off the highly skilled, whiny jerk who's toxic in the marketplace? Or the pleasant but incompetent guy who will lead us to ruination? This got harder after we fired all of the unskilled, whiny jerks, right? So then, of course, it comes down to who's uglier. But I think this brings to this issue that both matter. And so what's lost at the lens level is this ability to integrate across underlying mechanisms. So ability and motivation are, of course, both important. And my early work was very much in the strategy genre. Capabilities matter, arguments with Mary. I remember one time when Connie and you were in an AOM session saying, is this capabilities or is this cognition, right? But you know, I am being brought into the light in many different ways, and we do see that actually both do matter, and non-pecuniary incentives might drive even the high earners to be entrepreneurial. Also cool work by Mike and Henry, where are you? Right? Lots of nice work about, again, scientists and engineers as to where is it that ability makes an important context, and where is it that the taste for commercialization and taste for science matter as well. Right? So the ability to identify the explanatory power of the underlying drivers. So for instance, in the Agarwal and Oyama paper, we showed that the taste for non-monetary returns will sort between industry and academia. But within industry, because of the symmetry, there is no additional learning ability sorting. Right? However, in academia, you tend to see that higher ability people sort into basic, whereas the people with lesser ability will sort into applied. Right? So again, this talks about how the matching aspects work. 30 seconds for the graduate students in particular. Difficult trade-offs. You need to focus on integration versus focus. All of these actually represent flavors, horizontal differentiation, not necessarily rigor questions. So don't think that one way is more rigorous than the other. It's truly different ways of looking at the same phenomena. But it is important to do them with rigor, right? Whichever one you choose. There's a difference between a research paper versus a research program. And one of the things that I always have to caution my graduate students is they want to answer everything all at the same time, right? But if it's really worthy of discussion, you can never answer everything, or else the answer doesn't mean much. So each study, in fact, took years of development and research design. So it's okay to focus in a paper, but integrate across the multiple papers to figure out what it is that you want to say. And a good way to identify dissertation or new research ideas is to expand from extant work, right? So look at the conclusions and then ask yourself, if I take a different perspective, if I take a different level of analysis, if I use a different lens, how might the conclusions change? Thank you.
Thank you.
No, let's have each of you talk and then we'll ask questions.
So I'm just going to start before I have slides, because my slides aren't nearly as pretty as Rajshree's. So when Mike said, well, let's talk about the confluence of innovation and entrepreneurship, and we started having this phone call, he was very polite, because my reaction, he's like, well, so do these relate? And maybe we can have a debate about what's innovation, what's entrepreneurship. And I think I kind of said something like, I saw Rajshree's slide with the intersection, and I was like, well, yeah, duh, of course they relate. And so could we talk about something else in the session? And so in my mind, they relate, and maybe it's because they relate very clearly in my own research. So I sort of look at periods of technological innovation and change and ask this question, where do new industries, and you could substitute for that product market category, folks like to use different terms, but where do really novel things come from? And in my mind, it's at the intersection of innovation and generally entrepreneurship. And so the interesting question, and perhaps why this session does actually make sense, is part of why these two things have existed separately is that there are different traditions and often different research traditions that have made different trade-offs in terms of deep dives into startups, the level of analysis, and the kinds of things that we talked about with the 3 questions. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do a research design in 10 minutes, but I'm going to use this hopefully as an opportunity to get some feedback from you all on some research in process with a doctoral student at Harvard, Chiona Zuzul, where we're looking at the emergence of a new industry, the air taxi industry. So this project started, as do many of the things at HBS, with a teaching case. Awesome teaching case for any of you who are looking for a fun entrepreneurial case. It's about Linear Air, an air taxi startup. So back in 2007, I wrote this case. And so what is an air taxi, and why, does this industry even exist? Well, the short answer is I don't think it exists yet, and maybe it won't exist, which in and of itself might make it kind of interesting to study. So in the sort of late 90s, an ex-Microsoft executive, Vern Rayburn, started this company, Eclipse, down in New Mexico. And Vern said, I'm going to revolutionize aviation, right? And so there were a lot of advances in composite materials and avionics and such that he was going to bring together in order to develop a jet that ideally could be for under $1 million, a small jet. That jet, the Eclipse 500, ended up coming out not until 2007, so long time frame, but in some ways was quite revolutionary. And so Vern's vision as the entrepreneur who made this jet was that it could help take advantage of these 5,400 public use airports that are scattered around the US. So nice cocktail party fact for you all if you don't remember anything after this session, but you want to impress someone when you're hanging out at the bar. 98% of Americans live within 20 minutes of a regional airport, right? It's kind of an interesting little tidbit. So why does this matter? So air taxis could take advantage of these airports scattered all over the US. So for those of you who flew into Charlottesville, you probably had an experience quite similar to mine, which is, let's see, I left my house at 6:30 in the morning, took me an hour to get into Logan Airport, and then another hour waiting for my flight, which was delayed, and so therefore I missed my connection in Philadelphia where I hung out, and then finally at 4:30 I show up in Charlottesville. So my time isn't worth all that much. So maybe for me to take from 6:30 in the morning until 4:30 to accomplish what could, if you took an air taxi and went to a regional airport near my house and landed straight in Charlottesville, could have been a hour and a half experience. Not worth my time to pay for that, but for many folks it might be, and we could make this relatively inexpensive. So this is the basic setting. This is the sort of genesis of the idea. So the research questions are broad. So how does this industry emerge? What is the process by which some shared meaning around what this thing even is happens, right? I've called it an air taxi, and I'm dying to see your paper later on about naming in an industry, because there are all sorts of different names that folks use to describe this, and that's one of the things that we're looking at. And then, because I need to learn how to focus, right? We're looking at established charter companies that are thinking about entering this space and startups that are entering this space and trying to understand what they do. So highly, highly uncertain. In 2007, this is straight out of the teaching case, if you look at forecasts of how many VLJs, very light jets like these Eclipses, are going to be sold, the estimates are sort of all over the map, and folks don't know whether to include air taxis or not, so lots of confusion. This is a brief timeline of the emergence of the industry. So we've got Eclipse being founded. Which one of these is going to point? Oh, that didn't work. All right, well, Eclipse is founded early on, right? Takes a long time. There's this kind of interesting little, so I talked about how jets are being revolutionized, and the Eclipse is this cool, jet with 6 seats, and people love corporate jets. Who here's ever flown in a corporate jet? Oh, man. Wow. Who paid for it, Michael? Your startup?
No, I worked for an insurance company.
Okay, it was kind of a nice experience, right? Yeah, I've never flown on a corporate jet, but that was the whole reason I wrote this case, is I thought maybe I'd actually get to fly on the Eclipse, but no such luck. What I have flown on, however, is a little putt-putt airplane, a Grumman Tiger that has, 2 seats in the back and 2 in the front, because my husband flies, and so he drags me around with him. So someone said, well, those jets are expensive, and using those for air taxis might not make sense. So Cirrus came up with a little 2-seater putt-putt. So we have the Cirrus SR-22 piston. Its claim to fame is it has a parachute. So just because it's a single engine plane and folks can be uncomfortable with that, right? Right, not to mention a small little plane. So we've got 2 different, in some ways, competing views of what this air taxi industry might be. One, the corporate jet experience on a smaller scale. The other, a sort of upscale version of the little putt-putt plane experience. And both of those are currently happening as we speak. So the government, in its infinite wisdom, that did actually span for 5 years, from 2001 to 2005, studied this, SATS as they called it, small airport transportation, and spent a bunch of time trying to figure out what do we need to do with air traffic control and ILS runways and such, and they said this could happen, and they issued a big report in 2005, and that kind of was that. And so we got on the bottom half here all the kind of stuff going on under the scenes, and then the top, the companies that Tiona and I are studying in depth, which are the companies that are actually doing something that they call either an on-demand charter, air taxi, air limo, all sorts of other names. So we have, the first service using the Cirrus in 2004, a service by Linear Air using a Caravan because the Eclipse wasn't ready yet for a while. Lots of experimentation, so Scott would like this. And then we have the Eclipse services happening in 2007. So everything's looking great, and then of course the economy crashes, and Dayjet, one of the big players, goes out of business, and Linear Air, the company I studied, has some issues, and so we're now coming out of that. So this is sort of the setting that Tio and I are looking at. What's interesting to us, because we're studying entrepreneurship, is the founders, right? So even as a starting point in the teaching case, I thought it was kind of cool the difference between Bill Herp, the guy who I was writing the case about, and Ed Jacobotti, the Dayjet founder, in their approaches to this industry. So Bill, the lean, mean serial entrepreneur, has a very kind of what we teach, low fixed cost investment, high variable cost, leasing his planes sort of, one by one. Ed, on the other hand, a software guy, spent $20 million that he raised on a sophisticated software system to set up an entire system that basically had to be launched pretty much at scale. And then we have Randy Harmon, who is one of the founders of one of these firms that uses the itty bitty little putt-putt, planes, the Cirrus, to do a jet taxi service. And this guy is an ex-Navy guy who loves flying, wants to find, an excuse to spend his life flying and having fun. And so he's sort of got yet another approach. So their motivations differ. Bill is a user entrepreneur, Sonali, and so Sonali and I have this fun paper that you all should look at if you haven't, about the notion of user entrepreneurs, but she and Cheryl have actually now done some really nice documenting of how prevalent that phenomenon is that I think you're going to talk about later today, so pitch for that. So Bill's a user entrepreneur. He knew nothing about aviation. I mean, talk about balls. This guy has never, been in the airline industry, knows nothing about it, but decides he's going to start an air taxi company. So because of his own experience in dealing with airports, right? So his view is to take people who might have, flown on corporate jets, people who are going from main airports, and substitute with an air taxi service. So he's looking at substituting for commercial flying. Ed, on the other hand, is setting up in Florida, and he's viewing this as a substitute for driving. And similarly, Randy says that most of his customers take his little putt-putt as a substitute for driving. His main motivation, though, of course, is to make a living doing something I'm passionate about, right? So he's just got a couple planes and will probably be quite happy with the business like that. Okay, so we've got different founder backgrounds, different visions of the industries that I sort of talk about, different names. We still don't know what quite to call this. Flexible air charter service, I'm not sure that makes you really to want to get on it. Air taxi, though, sounds kind of low end. Air limo, too expensive. Private jet, so the industry still has no idea what to call this. Day jet, we never call it an air taxi service, right? So this is Dayjet's, promo map of when they were in the business. They went under, which I may have neglected to mention during the downturn, right? So we've got different views. So what are we doing? What is our research design? And then I'm going to relate this to the 3 questions. So at this point, the problem is we're kind of doing everything, which is maybe good, maybe bad. We've got this population of all of the charter operators that use very light jets. And so that's about 150 or so from FAA data. So that tells us, when they were founded, how many jets they have, or little Cirrus SR-22s. We're in the process of doing a survey with gathering detailed data on the founders and their backgrounds in the founding teams. So we're getting factual data about where they worked, what they did, as well as asking them questions about, what did you perceive as the opportunity? Why did you start this business? What business model do you think is appropriate? Who do you view as your competitors? A sort of whole series of questions around, what their conceptualization is of this thing. And then detailed data about the companies. So what's gained or lost by looking at just startups or established companies? Well, in this context, I don't think we could afford to look at just one or the other, and maybe you guys can correct me on this. And this is where, in these 3 slides, Mark wanted us to be slightly controversial, so I'll try to be a little bit controversial here, right? And say, if we were to just look at the air taxi startups and not any of the charter companies that were sort of chugging along, we would miss a lot. And it's in that contrast that we might find something interesting. My real question is, do we need to expand our sample? Because by just looking at the folks who are doing this sort of on-demand charter, very light jet air taxi thing, we're missing all sorts of stuff. Ron Adner and Rahul Kapoor have this stuff on ecosystems now, and is it important for us to be thinking about the ecosystem? Should we be studying the guys who make the planes? Because that's an important part of making sure that the service could actually be offered, or the FAA, or to do NetJet. So I'm hoping in the discussion section you all can help us with this. For the moment, we're only doing a survey of the air taxi startups. What's gained or lost by looking at one level of analysis? Well, we're not comparing industries here. We've got one industry, and the firm and the founder, in an entrepreneurial company, I would argue those are one and the same. So you can't study a startup without studying its founder. And I think it's important, therefore, to understand the individual level and the background of that founder and sort of where they're coming from. And then my biggest bugaboo, and maybe this is because I've just read too many literatures, Rajshree, is, so this last question, what's gained or lost by looking at only one lens? As much as possible, in the studies we do, I would argue, even if our primary lens is, say, incentives or capabilities or cognition, we should try our best to control for the other factors, right? So the problem you run into if you focus on one versus the other, and you all have probably had this experience where you read someone's paper and they have a variable and they claim that variable is measuring X. In this case, let's say capabilities. And maybe this is where Connie and I were getting into it, right? They're like, here's our measure of capabilities. It's well, I'll pick on Steve Klepper, a dummy variable for TV firms having come from radios, and that's going to represent capabilities, because the guys who did radio had a certain set of capabilities, right? Well, that dummy variable could mean all sorts of things, right? It could mean not just their capabilities, it could mean the way they think about things, it could mean, their relationships, there are all sorts of things captured in that measure. So the more we can try and tease out the differences between these factors, the better, and at least at a minimum to acknowledge that the other stuff is there. Because if you don't, I would actually say it's not just that we're not developing integrated theories. You know, we're coming to conclusions that could just be wrong. So that's my perhaps aggressive statement for the day, and we're on to Gary.
Thank you.
Whatever.
Morning. I'm going to reach for my water. Okay, so Andrew, please don't start the time because I have a couple of house setting comments to make. First one is I've been teaching my MBA class all of this week. I taught yesterday from 8 till 11 in London, jumped on several planes, and I'm here today. I have no idea if I'm going to make sense or not. What I will do is probably cold call. Okay. Maybe most importantly, I wanted to thank Mike and the organizers for putting this conference together. I very much wanted to be here. I missed a few of the early ones because of transitions and so on and so forth, so I'm delighted to be here now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take an interim approach between Rajshree's kind of 30,000 feet view on this question, Mary's 3,000 to 10,000 feet view of the question. I'm going to cruise at about 15 to 20,000 feet in terms of talking about this thing. And let me start off maybe with this question. I'm going to start with a joke. I'm usually using different business school graduates with this joke. I'm going to disguise the different business schools right now. But I've been renovating my flat recently, and somebody told me this joke that kind of resonated with me. About a person who goes and gets a quote from a company led by business school A graduate. And he gets a quote for, say, £100,000. Then he goes to another company and he gets yet another quote. This company is managed by a graduate of a business school B. And that quote is £150,000. Finally, he goes to a graduate of yet another business school. This is a business school C, and you can assign those business schools to your likings. And he gets a quote, and the quote is 150. Is 300. He's like, 300? What's up? What's going on? And the guy tells him it's very, very simple. What's going to happen is that we are going to take this 300, we are going to split half of it, and then we're going to contract the guy who manages the first company to actually do the job. And I think when you look at this joke, I think it resonates more with the Krishnerian kind of view of awareness and uncovering or generating opportunities, whereas what is implicit to a lot of the conversation that we've had in this panel is basically Schumpeter. And kind of debating, especially in the context of the first question, whether it's the early Schumpeter, the young Schumpeter, or the older Schumpeter, and where is innovation coming from? Is it the young upstarts, or is it the more established corporations? I think, and that's a way to think about the way that we are talking about this question. What I'm going to propose to you, which is probably not too surprising for those who know my work, is that it's probably both. Okay? And in the 21st century, 2012, what we see is that it's not either or, but it's really a combination of the two. And those of you familiar with my work on corporate venture capital are not surprised to see this sample. But the reality of it is that small and large corporations work hand in hand. This is not I came, I saw, I conquer. This is work hand in hand in order to develop and push the innovation on the innovation frontier. Many of you are probably familiar with Intel, that has one of the longest standing corporate venture capital funds, Intel Capital. And Intel is working hand in hand and also provided an investment in return for an equity in an Italian company called Medialario. Now, I'll be very surprised if anybody have heard of this company. It's an Italian company. Anybody here familiar? You're from? Yeah. You have no idea what they're doing? Okay. Thank you. So basically, those of you really need to be an extra geek like myself to kind of know about this company. What they are in highly precision optics. And if you've ever done large-scale space exploration kind of a project, you probably have contracted them for their know-how in precision optics. Well, many of us know that semiconductors basically is an exercise in precision optics when you print, in fact, those circuits. And so as Medialario wanted to push the envelope in some recent semiconductor manufacturing, it made sense for them to come hand in hand with Intel in order to develop this technology. And this is the kind of not only established corporation, not only startup, but joint process that is very important. The thing is that when you study the nexus of innovation in that respect, you cannot focus only on one or only on the other. This is a very nice quote from when I started my doctoral program. I guess it's a telltale sign. And this is Microsoft basically saying we need to look at startups. That's where innovation is coming from. This is the dot-com ages, something that my current MBAs view as history book material. And so you see that the logic there is that established corporations should look more closely at startups. But it's not until you look at the startup perspective that you see that sometimes their incentives is actually to run away from the large corporations rather than running towards them. So I gave an example where earlier it made hand-in-glove kind of a thing. It made a lot of sense for the two to work together. There are situations where, because of competitive pressures, intellectual property considerations, and so on and so forth, they actually want to run away. And if we want to understand where innovation is coming from, what are the hurdles to innovation, we really need to take this dual approach. We need to consider both of them at the same time, because looking at only one side of the equation will probably lose a lot of the actual innovation-driving dynamics that is taking place in the marketplace. And so there's an SMJ piece along with Miles Shaver when we attempted to look at this, and the question there was simply which kind of these collaborations actually do materialize out of the universe of potential relationships that have taken place. We study which one of them have actually materialized. Bottom line, the answer is that there are a lot of frictions out there that determine the extent to which these kind of collaborations might actually take place. And this is just one exercise that we've done. This is a univariate analysis reported in the paper, where the idea here is that a lot of collaborations make sense. The startup can benefit from access to laboratory, industry insights, reputational effects, and so on and so forth, but is also much concerned about competitive pressures and intellectual property expropriation. In those settings where patent protection is weak, we are not going to know which one is the laser, huh? Yes, there we go. Where patent protection is weak, it's going to be a friction that precludes the two from coming together. On the other hand, in those settings where patent protection is strong, it kind of lubricates and enables the two to come together, and these are areas where we might see innovation progressing at a faster rate. I wanted to share with you a more recent study with one of my co-authors, Elisa Alvarez-Garrido, who's basically looking at the long-term effect of what does it mean. Because I just made the pitch that the way entrepreneurs and established corporations come together will affect innovation. But we don't know what is the effect of that. And if we look at this survey that was done with biotech companies just earlier this year, we see that more and more of them are in a situation where they need cash. They don't know where the cash is. And they go to the one source of cash that is available these days, which is large corporations. The question we asked in this study is, what does it mean for our society in terms of the innovation trajectory? What kind of innovations will emerge down the line? I don't know about you, but I start to care more and more about the advancement in the medical space for clear reasons. And a lot of the convention that we have is that startups backed by VCs generate innovation. But do startups backed by corporation generate innovation, and what kind? And so what we've done is we've basically looked at what type of innovation do corporate-backed startups generate compared to those generated by independent VCs. And when you look at that, you always need to do a design that accounts for both the selection, which startup do they even choose to invest in, as well as the actual effect, the nurturing effect. In both of these situations, what we do is we look at how did these startups look like in terms of their basic or publication, academic publication research, as well as in terms of their applied, or if you wish, patenting output. And we look at it at the time of investment, and then 4 years out. I'm going to push on the results faster. The most important thing to see is that corporate-backed startups generate different types of innovation. And I think one of the things that we need to be thinking of as we're taking this dual perspective is that as the world is changing and as startups and established corporations come to a different type of equilibrium or a different type of collaborative relationship, the innovation trajectory that we'll see, what our society will experience, is also going to be different. So that's enough about that. Let's talk about unit of analysis. How many of you have heard of the Jobs Act that was recently passed in Congress? Okay. Bonnie, did you have anything to do with writing it? A little bit, okay, I suspected as much. Curious to chat about that. Okay, so the US has really kind of taken leadership, partly because we have to, in terms of thinking about entrepreneurship, jump-starting our business startups. I believe that's the jobs, that's what it stands for. And one of the things that is a personal interest to me, and something that's been quite celebrated in the news, is the whole issue of crowdfunding. Anybody here have heard of the term crowdfunding? Okay, crowdfunding is basically what I would like to call an eBay for ideas, if you wish. It's almost like an eBay-like platform where people with ideas and people with funds can come together and fund them. Why? How did I come from this to crowdfunding? Because I think that when we talk about crowdfunding, we tend to do the same thing that we've done before, which is apply some of the findings that we have from one setting to another setting. And I'm extremely cautious and concerned about it. And I want to echo what Mary and Rajshree have said in doing so. You really need to look at what are the primitives, what are the underlying assumptions, what are the drivers in that setting. And let me just give you one example. When we think about funding entrepreneurs, and especially for many of us who've been kind of reading the literature of the last 15 years, we tend to think about venture-backed, VC, venture capital-backed companies. And venture capital basically has a very particular microstructure. Those are money managers in a way that take other people's money, invest it in startups, and return it back to those people within 3, 5, 10 years' time. The whole economics is very particular. Amounts and time horizons are very specific. It's very different than the world of angel investors who invest their own money and so are susceptible to different time pressures, susceptible to different set of inclinations and investment criteria, and so on and so forth. And what I want to articulate with you is that the world of crowdfunding, which serves as effectively a platform that brings an even greater set of heterogeneous individuals with different time horizon, different investment criteria, different capabilities, and so on and so forth, might actually generate the type of innovation that are very different than what we've seen so far. And so it's not until we revisit the unit of analysis or the level of analysis and look at the level of the microstructure of the market that we'll be able to fully understand the implications of the Jobs Act. And I think some of the more interesting work that should be going forward and some of the things that I've been thinking on these days is actually calibrate and be very precise about the microstructure of the world of crowdfunding and what are the implications for the type of innovation, the type of entrepreneurial ventures, and the type of ventures that we can support. And it's not a trivial argument to make to a student, you should also go and try crowdfunding alternatives. We really need to have better understanding at the micro level. Another maybe past experience that kind of very important to me, a personal journey if you wish, that also made the issue of level of analysis quite important. As you know, I come from the world of corporate venture capital. And one of the things that we know about corporate venture capital is that just in terms of patterns of investments, both corporate and independent VC kind of behave or invest in about the same period of time. But there are some important firm level variation. One is a company, the other is not. One is driven by strategic as well as financial goals, the other is not. What's extremely important and actually moves the needle quite often is something that it took me, and I confess, a long time, I think 3, 4, 5 years to uncover, happens not at the firm level, but more at the individual or the team level, and it has to do with the compensation practices. It has to do with the fact that within the world of venture capital, you get what's called a carry, or a significant part of the upside, whereas in the world of corporate venture capital, that oftentimes does not exist. The vast majority of them are not subjected to carry. And I think this quote illustrates it quite nicely. Apparently, it's not sufficient to generate 6,000% return to get anything more than your usual pay stub. Very different reality. And you see that this extremely powerful observation happens at the level of the individual. It's what the individual management investor actually feels, lives, and breathes every day. And what we were able to do in this study with Zoe Shapira is basically look at what does it mean? What does it mean to innovation when you have all of the things we know at the firm level, but you also have a very, very different reality in terms of compensation at the individual level. And and the nice thing about this setting is that you can compare both venture and corporate investors basically use the same investment actions, if you wish, investment practices. Both of them choose to invest in startups at different stages. And so you can look at what stages they invest in, and you find that corporate investors who don't have any of the upside tend to be more conservative. They invest in later stages, controlling for a lot of the firm level attributes past studies have looked at. We also find that with another investment practice, how much do they syndicate in order to diversify risk, but also give away the upside, they also differ, and they also tend to be more conservative. And the interesting thing about it is that that fraction of corporations that actually do offer upside, they look exactly like VCs in terms of the investment practices. So all of the research, mine included, turned to look at firm level attributes and drivers and how they affect corporate venture capital. And it wasn't until I looked at a different level of analysis, looking at how do these individuals get compensated, that I actually were able to uncover a very important variation within that marketplace. Last question. The beautiful thing about standing at this point in time is the reflection does not allow you to see how much time you've got left. I don't have much left. I don't have much to say. How am I doing? Zero. Okay. So I'm good. I'm on good grounds with the rest of the panelists. I just wanted to echo. This is a quote. I should share it with you, Rajshree. Basically, it says a lot of what Rajshree's work, Mike, Henry, and others in the room are saying, which is scientists, when you take somebody and from the age of 16, 18, you indoctrinate them with publishing, doing research, being rigorous, and so on and so forth, it's not surprising that what you get is somebody who evaluates things that are not just money, that are not only pecuniary rewards. And this is an example or a logic of corporate venture capital. We couldn't get that type of a talent just by giving him a name badge and a nice salary. Okay? Some of you might be familiar with one of my colleagues' work, Kevin Boudreau, who looks at Top Coder along with Karim Lakhani from Harvard. And they look at these competitions with hackers that come up with algorithms that are quite valuable. And the reward there is a T-shirt that does not represent the economic value generated. And so what I would like to say, I've lost the clicker. Great. Jet lag. What I want to do is I just want to be precise, because we have so much great work on science-based innovators that we might forget that there are other types of innovators, other entrepreneurs that are not privy or have not gone through this 15, 20 years career of caring about science. They are driven by other stuff. I think the work of Sonali and Cheryl might get a little bit closer to some of these things, but they are driven by something else. And when I study entrepreneurs who innovate, what I wanted to do is I wanted to differentiate them from what we usually think about what's driving people. So usually we tend to think about individuals as driven by opportunism or the desire to capture more money. We want to appropriate. Well, in the world of entrepreneurship, and I think we have quite a few studies at this point in time, there are other attributes that are important. Some of them is the social ribbons in the form of publication, academic publications. But for other pools of entrepreneurs, those social ribbons or intrinsic motivations might take other form. And we need to be very careful of these things. And it's important because if you're an investor and you are faced with an optimist, all of a sudden the frictions that you are facing are not only with the underlying quality of the technology, but whether or not this guy is an optimist and doesn't realize a bad technology for its qualities. And so there's a whole other set of questions. There's a nice org sign piece, nice, I'm self-attributing it, where I looked at these, at the implications, of these frictions, and you see a very interesting dynamic unfolds. I'm going to jump quickly here, but basically what you see is that the world gets a little bit more complicated. The strategic interaction, strategic entrepreneurship, what's unique to entrepreneurs and their cognitive and psychological attributes, and the implications of that to their strategic interaction with critical resource providers has been more complicated by the fact that they have this personal attributes of optimism, and that generates various predictions. One of them is that when I look at US-based investors investing in startups across the world, I find that controlling for a host, and there's a battery of controls there, the higher the level of optimism associated with the population in a given country, the greater the discount that US investors will apply to those ventures. So to conclude, I very much, apparently I've been heeding Rajshree's advice all throughout my career. If you look at my body of work, I've attempted to basically do exactly the advice that she's given. So thank you for that, even with the hindsight. I basically attempted to very much bridge these dual notions into my work, but within each and every one of these studies, attempt to hold all other things constant and look at one issue, either from the entrepreneur or from the investor perspective. And I just want to echo the comments that Mary and Rajshree made earlier. You want to be cognizant of the broader space out there as you embark on your own dissertation work, because this is frankly where the field is right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. So I'm going to take my moderator's prerogative and ask the first question here. And I'm going to try to be very provocative here. So we have this question. You all said, yeah, there's some advantages of focus, but really we're missing things here if we're not considering the whole picture. So given that, should we have departments of entrepreneurship? Should we have entrepreneurship scholars? Or should we have something that's a little more meta from that recognizes this interrelationship between established companies and entrepreneurs?
I can jump in.
Absolutely.
So one of my day jobs is academic director of our newly founded Deloitte Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And we have the institute. It has been launched about a year ago. We also have a department that's recently been named Strategy and Entrepreneurship. The institute and the department are not exclusive in the relationship. In fact, a lot of the logic that we have within the institute is to bring people from other disciplines, bring people with other interests, both in terms of geographical domains, level of analysis, and clearly disciplinary background. And so for us, I think the idea of having a set of people that self-identify and give some gravitational force, if you wish, to academic research in the domain of entrepreneurship, but also constantly feeding it with input from other people, not as a periphery, as a part of our rationale, is something that's very key to us.
So let me build a little bit on that. I think that question that you asked, Mike, relates to what's your fundamental philosophy of what good research is and ought to be. And there are multiple perspectives there, right? One would say, in business schools, we need to be focused on what are the phenomena of interest. And then as the different theoretical lenses are important, different views of the elephant, you need to bring all of those because the phenomena itself is very worthy of study. Then there are others that might say that the phenomena itself is not as important as much as the pure theoretical perspectives, in which case you could study that same issue with underlying theoretical different perspectives, and then across them there will be a combined sense of what's going on. I personally go with the former. I think some of the best advice that I received was from my advisor, Michael Gort, when I was thinking about transitioning from economics into strategy, and then strategy into entrepreneurship. But when I was making that first transition, he said to me that he thought that strategy was where finance was about 30 years ago. And that originally finance too was very much a microeconomics discipline. It was thought to be fundamentally just that. But over the 30 years, it evolved in a discipline of its own right, looking at and focusing on the phenomena and issues of interest. And so with strategy and with entrepreneurship too, I think that there is a need for us to look at these things, because I do believe in rigor and relevance, not just one aspect, and that there are multiple perspectives that apply, because essentially we're looking at human behavior. And so all social sciences are relevant.
So just to quickly, I think it might be useful to put the Venn diagram up just to kind of stimulate the conversation that we have right now.
So Mary, should HBS combine their entrepreneurship and strategy groups? Disband the entrepreneurship.
So it's interesting. So I'm with Rajshree. I believe. I mean, we are business schools. So in some sense, you could argue, should a business school exist if all we really want to be doing is economics or sociology or psychology? So practically speaking, in terms of, so why do we have entrepreneurship groups? I would argue that teaching is a big driver of a lot of it. And so part of why we have a separate entrepreneurship group is there's a course that the first years all take, which is about entrepreneurship. And it's, for the most part, about entrepreneurship in terms of starting companies. And the content of that course is different than the content of a strategy course, which, for better or worse, tends to focus on established firms and what they do. Are those two related? Clearly, and we've had some cases where there are joint classes, and in terms of research, I work with Giovanni Gavetti, who's in strategy. So, I think in terms of the research, we certainly, cross bounds other than the finance folks. So I might argue that the people who study finance should be in a finance group, not an entrepreneurship group. So I'll sort of go that far. I'd say entrepreneurial finance, if it really is focused on just the financial aspects and is being published in finance journals, probably belongs in finance. So I would agree with that. MIT has it all now in one big group. So they actually did take what was innovation. It was originally management of innovation, then it became management of innovation and entrepreneurship, and strategy was over here. And they've created one big circle around that. But within their entrepreneurship group, there weren't any people doing finance. I think at HBS, just practically right now, the group is mostly a finance group, so merging with strategy might not make sense. But I don't know. I'd be curious to see what.
So I'll just
Other
to
folks
get
think.
you off the hook. So Gary, the opposite question. So I'm also in a group that's strategy, entrepreneurship, and actually ethics together. Should we be splitting our strategy and entrepreneurship groups? Should LBS be splitting their strategy and entrepreneurship groups?
Well, I haven't spent that long with my colleagues to want to split from them just yet. In fact, I like to be together. For us, it's the merger that has taken place. It's the merger and the explicitly bringing people from other disciplines. And I can tell you, this gets to be almost a question of religion. Some different people have different approaches to it. What I like to do is basically echo what I think I've heard Mary say earlier. You want to study what you care about, but you want to be honest and robust about controlling for everything else. And I think that especially in a field as in entrepreneurship, where you have so many moving parts, at so many levels of analysis, if we'll just speak to the same group of people, we won't be able to get that level of precision that basically makes us as academics contributing to the conversation out there in society. So I think having an institutional setup where you're constantly challenged by these other disciplines and able to push the envelope on the precision that you have is what will allow us to generate research that is important and frankly valuable.
Well, let me open it up at this time to our audience here. I do ask, if you ask a question, please use the microphone. We have a couple up here. We'll run up to you since we are simulcasting this right now.
Hello, Simon Wakeman from ESMT. So I have a sort of another sort of broad question is about combining innovation, entrepreneurship, and all the different perspectives and so on. Should we, as individual researchers, should we still be specialists and then let us talk across boundaries to other people who do other things, or should we, as individuals, become generalists that do involve multiple different perspectives in our own work?
So I study evolution of firms, of industries, of people. So I would take very much an evolutionary perspective on even what you choose to study on. It's at least one that's worked for me. I think that specialization and in-depth knowledge and expertise in one area is profoundly important and necessary before you even think about boundary spanning. Right? So knowing one particular specialist domain inside and out, knowing the underlying assumptions, where and when are they valid, when are they not, and then thinking about across these boundaries as you look at different disciplinary perspectives, how might some of these be questioned and not. So at least this is what I was saying in the concluding sections of my thought, that as early scholars, as dissertation ones, you want to become an expert and a specialist. But then as you grow and evolve, it behooves you to also think about how these alternative perspectives might happen. To build on this issue of strategy and entrepreneurship, strategy and finance, entrepreneurship and finance, I actually think that we in the business school have a big challenge in front of us as it relates to exactly this issue, in that because we've got so many different perspectives that do have legitimate things to say, and because we end up being specialists, we also use them as religions, right? And then we put on blinders on, and in fact we have a Tower of Babel where everybody's going in different silos and not necessarily talking to each other. You see that in the organizational structure across different schools, disciplinary focus versus, as Ramananda calls it, soups versus salads, right? You've heard that more times than you want to. In terms of what is the disciplinary one, right? Is it a soup where it's a mixture of all of these perspectives all together, a salad where you can identify each strand by itself, right? I think we're going to come to a crossroads, not just in strategy and in entrepreneurship, but largely in management, as to how we address that very important question.
I don't have anything to add to that. I agree.
I agree. I think for me, it just to echo that, the thing that keeps me most humble is the fact that anyone in this industry, if you're looking at the R square in terms of explanatory power on many studies, it's not close to 1, and unless you have a fixed effect, a kind of firm effect kind of thing, it's not close to 1, which means that any one discipline cannot claim victory. We cannot put that flag on the top, and so you want to have this cross conversation. The thing that concerns me the most is that people don't take the time to develop the rigor in one discipline before they embark on the others. And when I talk to my doctoral students, it's the double or triple the amount of pain if you want to be successful, but you need to be very good at one domain, maybe even another one, but you want to take a more broad perspective.
Saras?
Should I say my name? Saras at the Darden School. I just wanted to push this conversation, which is headed this way, just a little bit beyond, and ask this question, that one of the observations, if you look at the way things are evolving in business school and universities, you see a lot of departments outside the business school beginning to teach entrepreneurship, whether it's engineering and technology entrepreneurship or public policy or other, which are beginning to start departments in social entrepreneurship or programs in social entrepreneurship. And so we might want to consider this question. We seem to be assuming that entrepreneurship somehow is some kind of a subset of the business school or just a phenomenon that different disciplinary lenses will, help us study inside the business school. But I just want to think through, why is it they're not trying to start like strategy programs or finance programs? You would think finance is pretty important. So just this relationship of which is the meta category, it's just something I want to throw at you guys. And I'd like to hear everybody's views, including Mike's as well, on this, because he raised the issue in the first place.
Yeah, so I'll say, I think, so for the Harvard undergrads have always wanted to take courses at the business school, and entrepreneurship is at the top of their list. And finally, for the first time now, there's an innovation lab, and there's an entrepreneurship course that's being offered that undergrads can take. My sense is that the part of the reason why it's entrepreneurship that engineering schools and others are interested in teaching as opposed to strategy or OB is that entrepreneurship is integrative in the sense that it takes into account the OB marketing strategy, finance issues from a very practical standpoint if undergrads are developing a business plan. And a lot of the demand is being driven by, I'm an undergrad, I have an idea, I have a technology, and I want to think about commercializing it. So I would argue it's a very practical reason that entrepreneurship is happening. I would pick on Chuck Easley, who was in an engineering school, to talk about sort of more broadly, one of the only engineering schools that you could argue has a broader. Yeah, I'm not sure that there are I think it's a very, at most schools, at Princeton, it's being taught by a lecturer. At most schools, it's a very isolated thing. I guess, does that cause us to think about the research questions that we're addressing differently? I'm not sure I think so, but maybe.
I'll make one.
Is that you?
Who turned off the phone?
You want to go through?
Rajshree.
It's a nice song.
this is my class, I'd answer it for you. So, one observation on these lines that I think may be a little disconcerting, especially for entrepreneurship folks, is like many disciplines or many areas of study, there's this sense that the world of practice knows better. And that's a lingering challenge that I think entrepreneurship has had. And it's amazing to me that I still hear that from successful entrepreneurs. You can't teach entrepreneurship. You should only have established entrepreneurs teaching these classes. There's no academic study of this topic, and I think there's been a lot of progress made on that front. Yet I suspect that in a number of these other schools that are taking up entrepreneurship, they're responding to a market need from their students, but their response might be, let's bring in a bunch of established entrepreneurs to tell their war stories to communicate how to be an effective entrepreneur. And that can work, but we'd like to think we have some value add here from the research that we've done in that as well. And I think that's the risk, is that who exactly are they hiring to teach these courses? Is there a real academic basis for that education?
Please go ahead.
So building off of that, I think that it's very important to think about the, especially because of the engineering and sciences is where there is this unmet need, that there is, of course, the business of science. But then there's also the science and business, which these war stories don't necessarily capture. And I do think David and I are on this university committee on innovation and entrepreneurship and creating a center. So most universities, the way it comes up is engineering and business are the two that are having turf battles on this issue. And the turf battle is not so much on the research. This is where I think Stanford is a standalone as it integrates research issue and entrepreneurship. It's very much around the practice or the teaching element. But there are all of these unmet needs. Dance needs just as much about studying about entrepreneurship and how it works in their context, which is in the fine arts, as it relates and is different from the sciences, if you will, right? So I do think that as universities, we do need to think about, in the business school, generally speaking, what are the underlying canons of knowledge, and then how do we take on a leading position and not just think about our typical MBA market, but focus on PhD, MBA classes, right? I mean, that doesn't work on our rankings, but it's an unmet need that we really need to be thinking about, or certificate programs or minors and majors in entrepreneurship, where we're not just saying, okay, we're professional schools for the MBA.
Just a couple of observations, 3 observations. The first one is that I think what we do know from research is that entrepreneurship is a world of highly skewed events and highly skewed returns. And that always gives me caution when we bring somebody from the street and effectively exercise extreme form of selection on the dependent variable in letting them teach, because we are bringing somebody that probably doesn't represent the full distribution that our student will meet ex ante, and letting him share his experiences that might or might not be, I'm sorry?
Or her.
We happen to have only male, but that's fair enough. Point well taken. The female never exercise this mistake.
Go ahead.
And so I think that just the one observation of the highly skewed nature of entrepreneurship suggests that taking one person embedded in one experiences will amount to selecting on the dependent variable, and that's why it gives me caution. And I think if not in terms of selecting who teaches it, in terms of program design, it's our role as academic directors to actually build this into the domain. The other element is if you take some of the frameworks that exist out there in terms of opportunity identification, resource assembly, and managing the growth, I think that a lot of the specific sector-wise calibration in opportunity identification can be done better in engineering or maybe better in other schools. But some of the issues that are organizational in nature, that many of the people in this room have shed light on, are the domain of research, and where we have the kind of knowledge and capabilities that were alluded to. And then finally, I've been told that the field of strategy have had a similar dynamics to the one that Mike represented some 20, 30 years ago. And we see that right now we are at a different point where the field of strategy is. And so that might give you a sense of direction of where the field of entrepreneurship might be in the future.
I just want to say one quick thing in defense of adjuncts teaching entrepreneurship, because it's not necessarily just war stories. Half of the entrepreneurship professors at the Harvard Business School are adjuncts. So Shekhar Ghosh, who started Open Market way back when, teaches our first year entrepreneurship course. And as long as you have an open-minded, successful entrepreneur who doesn't want to just tell their own story, but really has some intellectual curiosity about the field, I think they can be incredibly effective. And part of our job is maybe helping them to understand what the research that we've done is, and how that can be communicated, whether through textbooks, whether through cases. So I wouldn't assume just because they're a successful entrepreneur that's going in teaching that they don't want to have an intellectual foundation to what they teach. I think that they can actually be very effective in that.
And a 30-second build up on what Mary just said. So as we are now thinking at the University of Maryland to develop cohort-based programs which are discipline or science specific, one of the things that I have really enjoyed is actually partnering with the successful entrepreneur, successful businessman in that domain, because what I have is the content generalist information on how the science of business works, but what they have are the specifics, which really nicely complement. So for me, the favorite way of doing it is for me to provide the broad tenets as it applies across, but then they focus on the specifics of how it relates to their area.
We have time for one more question. We get to
Okay. Gosh, I feel bad taking the last question, but okay, if you insist. Maybe it's continuing along in the same line. I don't think this actually Oh, okay. Okay. To continue along the same lines, a lot of the confusion that we have in having this kind of discussion is that we use terms like entrepreneurship and to some degree innovation. Some of the times we mean it as a phenomenon or a set of phenomena like startups or entry or so forth, but we also use the terms to describe sort of a way of thinking or a way of acting, creativity, alertness to opportunities, judgment under uncertainty that may or may not be manifest in those phenomena that we bundle as entrepreneurship or innovation. You know, most of our courses are organized around phenomena. On the other hand, if that's the aspect of entrepreneurship we're interested in, then having it as a department and having its own courses makes a lot of sense. But if we think of entrepreneurship at this other level, then it's a bit like ethics in a sense that there's a strong case that we shouldn't have standalone courses in ethics or departments in ethics, because in a sense that those marginalize ethics by making it seem like something that you only think about in this one course, as opposed to making all of our courses incorporate a component of ethics. To the extent that entrepreneurship is about alertness to opportunities and judgment under uncertainty and so on, then why would we want that in a course, or why would we want a department in that? We would want that sprinkled into all of our courses and all of our departments, and not only in business, in fine arts, in engineering, and social science, etc. So, I sometimes have thought it would be an advantage for the field if we proposed, a 5-year moratorium on the word entrepreneur and entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial, and don't allow anybody to use those words in describing research, in framing research, or in teaching. If I'm doing a project on entry into a technology market, I should just call it that. If I'm doing a study of opportunity recognition, I should just call it that, and not bundle so many different levels of analysis under the same term that makes it very difficult to answer these kinds of questions that we're now talking about.
So I would argue that it is fundamentally different, the thought process and the actual steps that an individual or a founding team go through in creating a new company, as opposed to the broader set of issues around thinking entrepreneurial and being creative. So yeah, I'm all for, in strategy and marketing and other courses, we should be encouraging some content around things like managing risk or, encouraging innovative thinking in a large company. But one of the debates we've had back and forth is, should we, in our entrepreneurship course, have part of the course be about corporate entrepreneurship and the rest of it just be about startups? Or should the corporate stuff be weaved throughout? And I, having now been through this multiple times, believe strongly that there are very distinct bodies of both intellectual knowledge in terms of the research that we do and the issues that are faced, and just very practically in terms of the steps that one would go through practically to think about starting a company and evaluating opportunities, gathering resources. I I don't know, folks who self-identify primarily as entrepreneurship, actually, I'd be curious as to their perspective on this, because they might feel more strongly than I do. But I think there should be a separate course called entrepreneurship that is about starting a company, for my own personal.
So your question actually relates to the theme of this panel, in that it relates to focus versus integration, right? So do you have a focused course on entrepreneurship, or do you integrate entrepreneurship across all of the different perspectives that have something to say about it? You know, two things out here. One, if you look at the history of economics textbooks, in the 1930s and 40s, you had 4 factors of production. In fact, even till the 70s and 80s, there were 4 factors of production, right? Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. If you look at all of the textbooks in the 70s through the 2000s, entrepreneurship was gone. And that is the risk that you face when you say, oh, we should just have all of the disciplines do it, because they may focus on areas and of issues of interest that aren't necessarily going to give primary focus to entrepreneurship. And I worry that that's exactly the issue about ethics too, using your example, that yes, every one of us when we're teaching MBA is now required to do ethics, but it is an add-on which is often not well integrated and not given much thought when across different courses you do it. So again, it's the trade-offs inherent in your question, and it's not one easy answer.
Gary? I introduced the word microstructure, so let me introduce it again. We need to think who are the people who come to the gate and consume these different courses, whether within a business school setting or within an engineering school setting, and so on and so forth. And I think a lot of what the mission statement of a particular course should be also designed with the mind of who is the people coming through the door, what is their profile, and what is it that they are likely to do down the road. And I think that can also inform a lot of the conversation that we've had right now. So is it a main theme for a business school student? Is it an additional part of an engineering school student? All of these things should also be considered, kind of the microstructure of who are the students, why are they coming to the door. And the same course will be perceived and have a very different value add for as people go through different journey in life.
I think that's a good way to end. Why don't you join me in thanking our panelists here for a very interesting discussion. Just quick logistics. We're going to take a break now. We're going to get started again at 10:30. We're going to have 2 rooms available. They're actually the next 2 rooms down in the hallway here. In classroom 40, right next door, we're going to have a session, a series of papers looking at innovating across borders. And then in classroom 30, we're going to have a series of papers looking at innovating across ventures. So choose well.